Okay, so hello everybody and welcome to this afternoon's webinar. Just checking, Helen, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can. Yes, Sophie.
Yeah. Okay, great. Great. So welcome to the webinar this afternoon, everybody. My name is Sophie and I'm the Professional Development Manager at English Australia. And the presenter for this afternoon is Dr Helen Forbes Mewett, who works at Monash University. And Helen has conducted a whole host of research in the area of international student mental health and student wellbeing. And she's just recently released a paper where she's collated the research over the past 15 years in this area and brought it all together. So on the back of the launch of that new research paper, we invited Helen to deliver this webinar for us about international student mental health. Now, the other presenter for the webinar was going to be the convener of the English Australia Mental Health SIG, Trish Behan, but unfortunately Trish is having a lot of issues connecting, which is also why we were a little late starting, so I'm sorry about that. I'm also going to try and fix my screen so that you have the a different view, so give me 1 second, and then I'm just going to take over from Trish, then I'll conduct the interview with Helen. So Helen, let's get started.
Okay. Thanks, Sophie. Thanks very much.
And Trish is also going to, so I'm just trying to get the questions up. Sorry, everybody, this was a bit of a surprise to me. So I'm just getting what I need up on the screen.
Hang on, I've just lost you.
Okay. All right, we might just have to go in this mode so I can see the questions. All right, Helen. So we've obviously based our questions for today around your paper, Mental Health and International Students, Issues, Challenges and Effective Practice. So I would like to start with the first question that you mentioned in your recent studies, that the focus has shifted from general health concerns of international students to mental health matters. Why do you think there's been this shift of focus?
Sophie, I think this shift has been due to a number of issues, and I'll just go over some of those that I think. I think first of all, it's becoming much more socially acceptable to talk about mental health issues, and people generally are seeing that in the public arena. So we see sports people, we see media, celebrities, and I think this is sort of encouraging that shift. Also, I think that students in particular are experiencing a very different social environment that's rapidly changing. So they do tend to be experiencing more stresses and strains, and also there's much more advertising about the types of support that students can receive, and so that helps them be more accepting of the idea of being able to put their hand up and say they're experiencing some difficulties. There's much more increased mental health literacy about the language about it, and this has come out of some most recent studies. And there's a shift from mental health problems in the past. It wasn't that they weren't there, they were, but they were being presented differently, and particularly by international students who may present with a physical illness, when in fact there was a bit of a call out for some help for other issues that were going on. So there's many more issues that they're dealing with, and I think young people today too are dealing with unstable personal relationships at an earlier age, and they're perhaps not, really yet well equipped to deal with the issues with those. So there's lots of things that they are being faced with.
Yeah, okay, yeah. And interesting, I was just speaking to somebody who is one of the advisors at Deakin University before, and she was saying that she's really noticed a shift in the language that students are using when they're talking about what they're experiencing. So that she notices students are talking about anxiety and depression now a lot more than, say, 10 years ago.
Very much so. And I experienced when I was actually doing my PhD, which was on international student safety and wellbeing. And I was actually studying with a lot of international students, and there was never talk about depression or anxiety or so forth. In fact, if the issue was risen, they were very uncomfortable with it. And that has changed quite dramatically. I've even seen a shift in that in the classroom. Certainly not to a great extent, but it is starting to become much more acceptable.
Okay. I think we have our other presenter here now, Trish. Trish, can you speak up if you can hear me?
Hi, Sophie, I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, great. And you may not be able to activate your webcam, but if you can, do you have a video camera icon that you can click on so we can see you?
Yeah, hold on. I'm not sure where to find this. I don't think I've ever had so many technical problems in all my life. Sorry about this, guys.
In any case, it's wonderful to be able to hear your voice. So perhaps we'll just integrate you into the conversation now, and later on, if you do end up finding that button for the webcam, you can click on it.
Do you know where that button is, Sophie? Sorry?
It's different on your dashboard from mine. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Mine was up in the top right-hand corner, if that's any help, but yours might be different.
Okay, carry on, and I'll keep.
So Trish, would you like to take over from here, or would you like me to continue with the questions?
Oh. You know what, Sophie? If you continue with the next one,
yeah,
or
sure.
hang on.
Okay, I'll ask the next question. So Helen, in 2015, you conducted a study in the USA, UK and Australia, and there seemed to be a strong focus on how on-campus and off-campus living can affect the mental health of international students. Your findings put a light on an area that many don't realise is a cause of mental health issues, and we found this very interesting. Can you explain the findings in this area?
Look, I can, Sophie, and the important thing was because previous to this big study across the US, UK and Australia, my work had been focusing on Australia, which tells us one story. And then when we looked at the bigger picture, it shows a lot more, and it gives some comparisons. And what it did show was that the on-campus living that they tend to have in the US and the UK, particularly in the first 12 months of the students, was offered great support. And also we need to consider Australia's history, in that we don't normally provide living away from home for university. There is some, but it's not for, we can't supply it for everyone, and there's decades there that we can't change. However, what I have noticed is that the trend now over more recent years for purpose-built housing is that is Australia's response to that, and it is a very good response, particularly if that purpose-built is near campus, because it helps the students feel a sense of community, a sense of belonging. And there was a study quite early on, going back quite a number of years, that actually showed that the academic outcomes for students were better when they were on campus, and that was attributed to the support and that sense of safety that they had. So that relieved the students of a lot of stresses and strains that they might otherwise experience. So I think that is something that really is ideal focus for Australia to look at that, and we can't and we don't need to provide the same way that the US and the UK do, but we can have our own version, and I can see that happening now.
Yeah, yeah. I found that really interesting to note that comparison of the different cultures around, living on campus or moving away from home in other countries that we don't necessarily have here across the board in Australia.
Yeah, because it's a much less drastic step for students to move away from home onto a campus where there's someone who's keeping a little bit of a check on them, someone that they can go to quite frequently and easily. So, and I know myself, when I was looking at some off-campus accommodation a number of years ago that was right near a university up in Queensland, is that I thought if that was my son or daughter going away, I would want them in that situation, because that university didn't have on campus, and that was certainly a very good next option.
Yeah, okay, great. Trish, are you ready to come in now?
I'm here, and I'm ready to burst in with a few questions, Helen, and I'm so sorry that you can't see me. It might be a good thing. So Helen, you stated in your recent paper that there were gaps remain in policy, programme and institution responses relating to mental health in Australian universities. And for me, this is very interesting. It covers a really wide area of focus though. So do you think there's one particular gap that we should focus on?
I think I've actually sort of noted a number, but I think we need to look at the students' cultures and their expectations, and we need to know more about their backgrounds, and because if there's pre-existing mental health issues, that's sort of one side of the story, and it's very difficult for students that are experiencing serious mental health issues to be away from family, and they need those traditional supports. And one of the gaps is that the support services we view it from a particular way, in that we see it from a Western perspective, and so we treat it from that perspective. And then of course the students are coming from a different background that we need to understand each other's approaches. And it's not certainly not an easy fix just to say, oh, well, we'll have people from different cultural backgrounds in, all the support services, because it's not possible, because there's so many different cultural groups and so forth. But if there's sort of perhaps more training and more understanding about those students' expectations and what the service provision is, because I feel that some students are getting to the stage where they're ready to reach out for help, which is an enormous hurdle that they are crossing. And
absolutely, I totally agree. Yeah,
and so then by the time then they get to that point, which is where the service provision needs to be really encouraging them to take that next step. And I think that's where many students are still backing away at that point. So we need to focus on particular groups and look at the expectations and their approaches about how this can be made to work. So I think it's about this juncture about what the students are expecting and the sort of help they think they'll get, and what they actually get, and what we offer. So I think that is the main focus that we need to look at.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Helen. And this kind of leads nicely into my next question, Helen. So I found it really, really interesting in your paper that you pointed out that there are misconceptions that international students don't access counselling services because of inadequacies on their part, when actually you said the issue lies in, or the students feel even, that the issue lies in the lack of culturally appropriate counselling services. And that stood out to me. That was really interesting. And then also a few weeks ago, when I was at the IEAA conference with you, I spoke to some students themselves who had experienced mental health issues while they were in Australia, and they themselves told me, without even prompting, that they felt that this was true, that they felt that there was a lack of cultural awareness in the counselling services we provide, and they said that they were really sensitive to this. Do you think this is a big problem?
Look, I do think it is, and it is something that's come out with probably one of the most recent studies that I have done. And I've just got some points up on the next slide that you might want to pop up there,
Sure.
is that there is a lack of it's seen as a lack of help seeking on the student's behalf. But of course that is understandable because they are not accustomed to seeking help for these issues. In fact, many of the students are only just coming to terms with what these issues are. So, and then for the service providers, it seems to be there's a lack of cultural awareness. Well, that is also understandable as well because, sorry, I've just had a message about a meeting. So that is also understandable, is that because we view it from our particular lens, and we can only really view it from our lens because that's all we know, and the same for the students. So I've got a quote up there which I thought really really says it succinctly, and it's using a student's words. So, and it was a Singaporean student who said, in Asian culture, what is a mental problem? So, he was saying, well, it doesn't really exist in a sense in their language. It is non-existent. It's a very Western thing, especially in the older generations. They don't care. For young Singaporeans, we are open-minded, but we are kind of stuck in between the changing generations. We still have Asian roots, but we are more educated and aware of these sorts of things like mental health and stuff. So I think it's transitioning for us, and we're in that awkward in-between zone. So I'm sure that the older generations do care, but they view it very differently.
Yeah.
So I think, this is just one student who has said this. I wouldn't be surprised if quite a lot of other students would agree with that.
Yeah. And one of the things I loved about your research, Helen, and I know you've been researching for quite a long time in several different countries like the US and the UK and China and Australia, you interviewed frontline staff and parents. And I wondered if when you interviewed the frontline staff, did anything stand out for you in these interviews? Like, did you think there was a difference between what frontline staff felt the issues were and what students felt the issues were?
Because the frontline staff tended to think that it was, well, we're offering the supports, and they were offering terrific services. Certainly not a criticism. They were the most amazing people working and wanting to help the students. However, they were saying, but if they don't reach out to us, pretty much what more can we do? So their view was that the students just weren't taking up the help. There didn't seem to be a real understanding in that the students were actually unable to take up the help because they weren't sure how, and they also weren't really comfortable with what was being offered because the students are looking for solutions. They're wanting, if they're feeling unwell and very concerned about something, they're wanting to go and see someone and have it fixed. And of course, it's not something that can be fixed so quickly. So they weren't really understanding that it would end up being a counselling session that was sort of to encourage them to come up with their own solutions. They were basically looking for solutions and guidance.
Yeah. And moving forward, Helen, do I sound okay here? I've got a bit of...
Yeah, there's
Okay.
So moving forward, Helen, do you think there's a need, and I kind of got this sense of this in the last conference I was at, do you think there's a need for students themselves to contribute to the development of our own institutional policies, like the mental health policies and strategies that I'm sure we're all working on?
Oh, look, I think there is, and I think they make a really valuable contribution. On a recent project I've been overseeing for the Centre for Holistic Health, and they've been running programs for things. And on the advisory committee, there was myself and a number of other academics, and also service providers, and also students as well. And their contribution was valuable. It was absolutely wonderful. And at a recent seminar that they held, there was a panel of Chinese students talking about mental health. So that is not just a step forward, that's a leap.
Yeah.
What we've had over so, and we need to understand that there can't be a one size fits all. What is right for one student or one group of students even is not right for everybody. And so the students can help us understand that that we're lacking. The students can really help us with that. And it all comes back to my, probably, and all the really big studies I've done. It's the smaller studies, cohorts, that I think keep unpacking this issue.
Sure. Trish, just to, I think Helen's breaking up a little bit, and it could be some interference coming through from you. Just if you can unmute yourself when you're talking and then mute yourself when Helen's talking, that'd be great.
Sure, sorry. Sure.
Yeah, no worries.
Thanks, Helen. Yeah, I love what you have to say about these things. You gave some really good recommendations in your paper, and one of them, the one that really jumped out at me, because I think it's kind of an unexplored concept, was benchmarking mental health services. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, my thoughts on that were sort of when I was putting the points together to raise about that, how that could work. I guess in some ways it could be a little bit controversial. However, because the literature that we look at is extensive, very relevant, but it's not exhaustive. So we can't really get down sometimes to the nitty-gritty of what we need to look at. And the deficiencies that we have in the system come from the lack of attention to details. Our services tend to be ad hoc. And so the idea benchmark institution support, and I hesitate to say against each other, so I will put alongside each other, so we can see who is offering what works and what doesn't, and how can we make it better across the board. So it's almost like a comparison about what's being done by different service providers. So, and I think the current proactive approach that we have in Australia at the moment is terrific, because rather than say, oh, we don't have compassionate students and mental well-being, they're saying we acknowledge that we do and how best to do it. So we ask, this is all the approach that has been taken. I think it's definitely the way to go. And because students, parents, and of course country government, they all want to know that the students are going to be well, and they want to know they're going to be mentally well and be able to study well. So I think that it's a very healthy and progressive way for Australia to progress.
Helen, I'm just going to ask you, you are breaking up a little bit. Would you mind turning your webcam off just to see if that helps? Sometimes it strains the connection a little bit.
Okay. Yep. How's that?
Okay. Yeah, let's see how it goes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm audible again. Can you hear me,
Yep.
Sophie? So I just have one very last question for Helen. Are there any other, so still kind of on the theme of recommendations, are there any other recommendations, Helen, that you think are like really key to just immediately moving forward with this?
Yes, I think, and they probably seem a bit out there, I guess, in a way, but I do think that we need to perhaps overcome that the problem of confidentiality about mental health issues, and it would be great if students would be able to have a declaration of good mental health, because that would, to begin with, because that would eliminate serious cases that do need to be home with their family. Then, of course, we need to deal with the other type, which is the ones that come from being away from home and the stresses and strains. So, and we can deal with that. Like we can find ways to support the students. I think we need to start looking at that, might sound a bit drastic, but about a first year on, or I say in Australia's context, near campus living in some sort of purpose-built supported accommodation with support services. And I think students need to be advised to factor into their accommodation choices the benefits of round-the-clock support and security. They tend to just think in monetary terms, much cheaper to live off campus with a whole lot of students in a house, without thinking about the social benefits that come with living in a supported type of accommodation. And we need to look at more diverse staff in counselling and mental health support roles for cultural training with that. And regular reviews of the cultural diversity help with that, because the literature is changing as along with students and staff. Yeah, they're the things I think we need to be really focusing on.
Thanks, Helen. Yeah, I think focusing on the staff that are looking after the students is probably key as well. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Trish and Helen, are you happy for us to take audience questions now?
Yes, that's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, sure. We can probably try to turn our webcams back on now. The sound issues seem to have improved. So does anyone have any questions for Helen? And if you do, please type them into the chat box. There are certainly some questions that have come through already. Somebody is asking about the declaration of good mental health and what that would look like and include. So the one that you just referred to in your recommendation.
Wow. Okay, that is something that would have to be looked at by a whole team of people, I would imagine, including international students, of course, and experts in the field, in mental health field, I would think. And because I am very conscious of confidentiality issues, and that came out in my very early studies about, the difficulties of doing something like that. But I think it would save a lot of angst for some students and their families and university staff if that could be implemented. But that certainly would have to be a very an issue that would have to be just discussed by a whole number of people, rather than me just saying, I think this is what it should be.
Okay, sure. Are there any other questions to come through? Yep, somebody's just asked about the slides. Yep, there definitely will be a copy of the slides and the recording from today's webinar available. It'll be emailed to people in a follow-up email tomorrow. All right, and I did also share a link to Helen's bio page from Monash University with everybody in the chat box, which from where there's available a whole host of Helen's research over the years from that page. And then I also shared the link to her latest digest, which we've been referencing, which is Mental Health and International Students, Issues, Challenges and Effective Practice, which summarises the research over the past decade. There is one more question that's come through, Helen. Someone has said they were wondering about the potential benefits of mental health first training for teachers. If you think that it's worthwhile or beneficial to train teachers in mental health first aid.
Look, I think it is, because often that I know teachers don't necessarily see themselves as medical providers or, or even counsellors. However, I think probably just to be aware of being able to perhaps acknowledge when a student who is experiencing mental health issues, who's not actually coming to tell you that, but you might be able to pick it up, and just to help people point them in the right direction to get some help, and just be aware of that. And I know in the university we are confronted quite frequently with students with various levels of mental health problems, and often they are academically related. So, it is really worthwhile for people to be able to have pointed out to them what some of the signs might be, particularly for people who haven't had any with family members or anyone really dependent on, they may not be able to recognise those signs. So I think it is really important to keep on alert, because then we can help them at a very early stage.
Yeah, great. Helen, we might get you to just turn off your webcam again. The sound's slightly breaking up. There's one final question before we wrap up, and it's about making counselling services more culturally sensitive. And the person has asked how you would engage, or how you would propose to engage students to get raw data on how to implement appropriate or positively impacting strategies and policies in making the services more culturally sensitive.
Yeah. I think it would be terrific to run some focus groups or with students to have some open discussions about, now that we think we've got a number of them coming to the point where they may seek out support, about the sort of things that would encourage them to take that step forward, or the things that make them back off. We need to know their reactions to different situations, and is it important to them to have someone from their own background to speak with, or is it just important to have someone who has a particular approach? Because the students all do change considerably after being in a new post-country after 12 months. So I think that we need this focus groups, many of them at different institutes, and have all of that information consolidated. And I think we can probably move to a better point of having much more support services.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that was a very useful answer. Trish, it is time to finish up. Would you like to wrap up just before we say goodbye to Helen?
I would. Well, I'm not sure how this started, because I couldn't hear you guys, unfortunately, but I just wanted to say that I first met, can I just have a second to just say I first met Helen 2 years ago when we presented at the AIEC conference. And Helen, a lot of what you had said then kind of inspired me a little bit to keep focusing on this area, because I thought it was so important. So I was thrilled to kind of see you again and see your plenary a few weeks ago in Melbourne. And I just think it's great that there's such a focus on this. I think we can all agree that it's such an important issue now.
Yeah, thanks. Trish. I'm absolutely thrilled at the attention that the issue is actually getting at the moment. It's been quite a long time coming, and been there for a long time. So I think it's absolutely fantastic, and I think we can actually feel excited about what's happening.
Okay, great. Well, I'd just like to say thank you so much to Helen for coming to share all of your knowledge and expertise with us today, and also to Trish Behan, who is the Senior Teacher at Macquarie University English Language Centre, and who's also the convener of the English Australia Mental Health SIG. Trish has organised this webinar today, so thank you very much for that, Trish, as well. And if you would like to join the English Australian Mental Health SIG, just head to our website, and there's a link to our SIGs from the professional development section of the site, and you'll be able to join up. Trish, would you like to say anything else, or Helen, would you like to say anything else before we finish?
I'd just like to say thanks very much for this opportunity. Again, to put mental health under the spotlight, because that's what we need to do. And I think there's fantastic work, and I commend you on the work that you're doing as well. So, yeah, I think we're at a very exciting turning point where things can start to happen in this area.
Thanks, Helen. I agree. Yeah. And it's an absolute huge area, and sometimes I feel quite overwhelmed at how much there is to do in it. But as many baby steps together is still achieving quite a lot, and that's just what we're doing with things like this, just raising awareness. So I think it's all good.
Yeah, I think there's definitely progress is being made, so we just need to keep building on that.
Thanks, Helen, and thank you so much, Sophie.
Yeah, thanks everyone for attending as well.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.